What is up, guys? Everyone here, bringing guys an update to one of my favorite decks, actually the third favorite deck I would say in my entire decks. It's Odd Eyes Magician Perform Pal, or whatever you like to call it. And this deck, I would love you guys to understand that this deck running free Odd Eyes Pendulum Dragon. So if you don't like this, you can cut them down and just put on something else. So keep that in mind. I just like running free Odd Eyes because it's my appreciation for the card. But if you want to run it at 1 or 2, it's totally fine by your means. But I just love to run this card at free. Now, another thing to let you guys know, this is one of my absolute favorites. So I would like you guys not to leave some mean and nasty comments down below. Even though that my deck profile sometimes don't see to your style, I would appreciate that. But without further ado, let's get started with this deck profile. And once again, this is not the most competitive build, so keep that in mind. And I'll try to go quicker as much as possible through the cards that actually everybody knows, so it wouldn't be such of a problem. So first off, you want to run 3 copies of Odd Eyes Pendulum Dragon, yada yada yada, the usual boss monster for an Odd Eyes deck. He's essentially a double damage and searcher during the end phase for a monster with a 1500 attack or less, which is a Pendulum monster, so that's pretty much simple. Next up, you want to run triple off the Perform Pal Skullcobra Joker. It's your searcher for all Odd Eyes magicians or Perform Pal monsters except himself when it's normal summon, so it's pretty simple, and him as well. The 2 new cards are Odd Eyes and Perform Pal, are 1 copy of Odd Eyes Dissolver and 1 copy Odd Eyes Synchron. Now, Odd Eyes Dissolver in the scale is essentially a fusion summon from your hand or field for a dragon fusion summon. For a fusion summon for a dragon type monster. It's a dragon monster now because they removed the type in the new text, but whatever. Then its monster effect is like it can special summon itself from the hand when your pendulum monster you control battles, and it's essentially getting you during the main phase the ability to fusion summon, also using a monster from your scale. So that's actually pretty awesome. The only downside for this card is it's a level 8 and is a scale 4. This card is the Synchro monster. Album for your Synchro plays is essentially if you can target during your main phase if it's in the scale. A Perform Pal or Odd Eyes monster you control, make it a level 1 tuner. Its monster effect, the first one is one to remember. If it's used from the extra deck, is basically banished if it's used for a Synchro play. And if the second effect doesn't really come up in this because you don't have level 3 Perform Pal monsters, and its monster effect is the most broken one. You special summon a monster from your Pendulum Zone. Its effect on negating, and immediately after this effect resolves, you Synchro summon using that monster and discard as Synchro materials for that Synchro monster. So most of the time, I'll bring out a level 8 Synchro monster. And that pretty much does it for the Odd Eyes Perform Pal. Next, we'll move on to the Old Magicians from your Master Pendulum, sorry. So free Wisdom Eye, because this card is essentially the most broken card in the deck, is essentially he destroyed himself in the scale for a Perform Pal or a Never Magician and just put another one except himself in the scale, and it's not once per turn. Double Oath, because I want to see this card. You can run it at 1, but this card is essentially your recycler from your extra deck, which is actually becoming really important. And it's going to recycle every Magician or Odd Eyes monster except himself. And in the monster zone, you essentially, when it's normal special summon, is essentially recycle from the graveyard, and it's also really useful because it's a level 6 and it's going with an Odd Eyes Synchron. The last 2 monsters are 1 Dragon Pit, because it's essentially your MST by discarding a Pendulum monster, and it's also level 7, which is nice, and scale 8, and 1 Noble, because Noble is essentially your tuner to be a level 7 Synchro plays, as well as fodder for Link's mechanic, as well as fodder to send to the graveyard, as well as just a useful card to summon with Harmonizing, which we'll get in a second, which is a card that you can use to special summon this from the deck and just banish it. You can say this one is your Trickle in the deck, and we'll get to the Garnet in the deck in a sec. But next up, for your new support, for the new Magicians, I run triple copies of Harmonizing, because the Harmonizing is the best card in the deck in my opinion. This card is essentially giving you free 100 attack for each Magician with different name in your scales, in your extra deck, so that's actually pretty awesome. So you can essentially getting like up to 1,000, I believe, in this deck particularly. I'm not 100% sure, I need to double check that, but it doesn't really matter. You have tons of Magicians, so you can essentially stock your monster at least with 300, and it's all monsters. Next up, its monster effect. It can only be Pendulum summon from the hand. It can only use for a fusion, synchro, or exceed with another Magician and not other materials. And if it's Pendulum Summon from the hand, you're essentially getting a monster, a magician from your deck in defense position, but banish it once, leave the field, and its effect are negated. So this card is pretty awesome. It helps you swarm the field, so you can essentially just Pendulum Summon this, Pendulum Summon Odd-Eyes Synchro, and you're essentially good to go most of the time. So that's really awesome. Next up is your other of the new cards is triple. Sorry, I actually caught another card with this. So triple copies of Astrograph. Astrograph is essentially not really important in a scale 1, but it is a scale 1 if you need to. His monster effect is not once per turn, and he can basically, if a card you control is destroyed, doesn't really have to be like a monster, but if a card was destroyed, you can add to your hand one monster that was destroyed this turn. Doesn't really have to be destroyed, but this effect that like your opponent used like a Twin Twister, and essentially add a monster from your banished on the monster with the same name from a card that was destroyed and sent to the banish, extra deck, or graveyard. So this card is really awesome, and it's one of the cards I'm actually using as a hand trap as well, and my YGO Pro, Dark Magicians, and Red Eyes. So this card is pretty awesome, and shout out to Zephyr Games to actually coming up with that hand trap idea. And the reason I run this at free is because I actually came up to play that this. I opened up 3 of this, and it's actually saved my ass and actually flood my field. I summoned with all the 3 of them a Decode Talker, like 2 of them, and Perform Pulse Scorecard Joker, a Decode Talker. And then I have also the ability to do Pendulum Summon to whatever I want, and also go rank 7. So that was really fun. Next up, for your cosplay magicians, you want to run double copies of the Pendulum Dragon, which is double Iris, double copies of the Fusion Dragon, which is a Purple Poison, sorry I forget the names, one of the Synchro Dragon, which is essentially, what is her name, White Wing, and double of the Xyz Dragon, which essentially your Black Fang. Now, what it does, we'll get from 1 to 1 in order. This card in scale is essentially protection for a Dark Spellcaster and destroying herself when she's using, like, to protect your Dark Spellcaster from targeting, which is meh. Its monster effect is essentially, if it's Pendulum Summoned and it's used for a Synchro Summon, you banish it, so it's essentially, again, meh, but still okay card. So she is your Garnet of the deck, like I said. But she's still really useful for your Zark play, so you want to run her at least at 1. Black Fang is essentially really good because you target a monster your opponent control, cut that attack in half. When he uses effect, he destroys himself, and then he's essentially giving you a monster from a Dark Spellcaster monster from your graveyard. So this card is pretty awesome. Purple Poison is essentially giving your Dark Spellcaster monster a 1200 attack during the damage step. And when he's destroying himself after he used that effect, he's destroying a 1 face-up card your opponent control, and he can even destroy, not your opponent, face-up card on the field, so he can even destroy your own card to getting more benefits. So this card is really awesome. Double Iris is giving your Dark Spellcaster the ability to do double damage like an Odyssey monster, and he destroys himself and search for a Pendulum Graph. So essentially I just need 2 because I run 3 Odyssey Pendulum Dragon, but if you run like less than 3 Odyssey Pendulum Dragon, you want to run this card at 3. But I decided to run that 2 because I have 3 Odyssey Pendulum Dragon, so I don't really need that card that much. And that's pretty much it for your new magicians. And lastly, for your monsters, you want to run 1 additional monster that actually have really nice synergy in the deck. And that will be 1 Luster Pendulum, because this card can destroy essentially your scales, your new magicians, or just in general any scale that you need, and just trigger Astrograph effect, or just destroying again the new magicians and just giving you effects. So that's pretty much it for the monsters. 29 monster count, essentially really high monster count, but that's what you need in Pendulum decks. Next up, I'm sorry that the camera is also moving, guys, because I'm using still my phone camera, because again, I don't have a normal camera, but it's still a pretty good camera, don't you think, guys? Next up, for your spells, you run 10 spells. You want to run double copies of Sky Iris, as well as 1 Terraforming to search it. You don't need more than that. Sky Iris is a protection to your Pendulum Scales, which are Magician, Perform Pal, or Odd-Eyes monster, as well as you can destroy a face-up card you control, and essentially search for an Odd-Eyes spell, so it's an Odd-Eyes card on the field, or Odd-Eyes card from your deck, so it's actually really useful. So we also run 1 Odd-Eyes Fusion, because it's essentially a really good fusion spell. You already know what it does if you play Odd-Eyes. If no, go look that up, it's actually pretty simple. Next up, you want to run triple copies of Duelist Alliance, because Duelist Alliance is essentially your searcher for all cards with the name of Pendulum. So you can even search your double iris, even though it doesn't have the name on this text box, but it does count always as a Pendulum Dragon, so that's why it can also be searched by this. So we have 9 searchable targets in the deck, and this card is pretty awesome. Next up, 1 Ignite Reload to just essentially shuffle like bad hands that you have. Then the last 3 spells are the searchable cards. Cards are searchable by Duelist Alliance, and the first one of them is Pendulum Call. I run this at 1 because it's essentially not that good in this day, but even still pretty good. This card is giving you the ability to discard a card, search 2 magicians with different name. They cannot be destroyed, so that can be bad with your other magicians. Your magicians cannot be destroyed until your next turn, and this card giving you what it called, and it's actually, if you activate a magician effect, this card cannot be activated, so keep that in mind. That's why I run this card at 1. And then I run 1 of each of the Pendulum Graph, which are the last 2 spell and traps I run. I don't only need 1 and 1 because essentially they're searchable with double iris. But if you want to bump this, I would recommend to bump each one of them to 2, or just bump this to 2, or this to 2, your personal preference. But what they do, this one giving your spellcaster immunity to targeting spells, this one to targeting traps, this one when your Pendulum magician monster you control leave the field from your Pendulum scale or your monster zone, you're essentially getting a search for another magician Pendulum monster. This one essentially, you target a card you control and target a card your opponent control, destroy both of them, targeting a magician you control in the Pendulum zone or in the scale, and destroy them both. But if one of the cards weren't destroyed, and you can send 1 card your opponent control to the graveyard, so you can actually protect your scales and destroy 1 card they control, and then send a card they control to the graveyard. So this card is pretty awesome, and that's why I'm considering bumping it up to 2. But yeah, that does it for in the main, of course. But yeah, that does it for the main deck. Now I'll move into the side deck. So first off, you want to run 1 Dragon Pulse, because Dragon Pulse is essentially your out for Masterpiece with spells in the side. It's just not good going first. It's a -1, so I don't really want to draw it. Next up, 1 Armor Fade Sloth, which I need to get 2 more to my side. So I really like this card. This card is essentially a floodgate to just lock your opponent to adding card from their deck to their hand. So as long as you control another Morphage monster, but you need to tribute for the next turn, so that could be annoying. Its monster effect is like neither player can special summon monster from the extra deck except from our Morphage monster, which doesn't really matter because most of the time I just tribute afterwards on this, so it doesn't like really stop me, so I can like close the floodgate. Next up, double Ghost Reaper, because Ghost Reaper is essentially really crucial because you can just banish your opponent Decode Talker or other Link monster if you would like to run other Link monsters and just stop them. It's essentially pretty crucial when we don't have enough Link monsters, so it's pretty good. Double Ghost Ogres, because Ghost Ogres. Double Gamma Seals, which are essentially your 2 Kaijus to the deck, which I wish were a Kamungus, but I don't have Kamungus. Kamungus is good in the deck because side deck because it's essentially a level 7 and can be Pendulum summoned, so that's why I like Kamungus better. But even Gamma is pretty good. 1 Regeki for board wipes. Double Twin Twisters to get rid of annoying back row. Sometimes this deck struggle with back row. Double Forbidding Chalice to dealing with annoying monster effects. And then lastly, I run the second Pendulum Graph of Star Pendulum Graph, and then the second Time Pendulum Graph if I need them in the main. So that's why I said I might actually want to bump them in the main and just run something else in the side, because they're just taking space in the side. But that does it for the main side deck and the main deck. Now we'll move on to the extra deck. So first off, 1 Zark, because it's Zark. It's your win condition in the deck, so you want to run this card in 1. You know what it does. Next up is a new card, which is Odd Eyes Venom Dragons. This actually came out in Battle of Legend Light Revenge. It's not that new, but it's quite new. This card, what it does, and in the scale, it's giving your fusion monster 1,000 more attack for each monster upon control. He's essentially need an Odd Eyes monster and a Venom and a fusion Starving Venom, I believe. Sorry, I will read that. I believe you need a Starving Venom. Yeah, you need a Starving Venom monster. I'm sorry, I just couldn't grid it for it because it didn't focus. But you need a Starving Venom and an Odd Eyes monster to fusion summon, which actually I don't do that much. I use it for something else. It's my Odd Eyes fusion target. Its other effect is like when it's on the field, you can target 1 card your opponent control. You gain a monster your opponent control, you gain its attack, you gain its effect, and when it's destroyed in the scale until the end of the turn, and when this card is destroyed, you can put you can special summon one card from your what are called Pendulum Zone, and just put this card in it instead. So that's pretty awesome. Next up, one Gatling Ghoul, because this card by itself can just OTK your opponent, doing 200 damage to your opponent for each card on the field, and then targeting a monster and destroy it and doing burn damage for that, and 2900, and with harmonizing it become bigger. Oh my god, this card is just nuts. Like, this card is pretty good. Next up is the Starving Venom. Starving Venom Supreme version, King version, whatever of that is essentially a really broken card, because it's giving you a monsters at 2800, which don't need to be fusion summoned with a fusion spell. It can be fusion summoned by tributing 2 dark Pendulum monsters, and it's also can gain effects from monsters from either player field or graveyard, so making this card even more broken, because if it's in the graveyard, you can gain his effect and then gain effect of another monster your opponent controls. And then it's also giving you the ability to essentially if you use the first effect, to just essentially all of your monsters now gain piercing damage. So this card is just dumb, and if you're targeting like an Artist Pendulum Dragon, he's doing double damage piercing, and your Artist Pendulum Dragon doing double damage piercing, so this card is pretty stupid. Next up is one Vortex Dragon, because the generic Artist monster, it's a negator and a compulse on summon, and that pretty much does it for the fusion. Now we'll move on to Synchros. One Nirvana, because it's my personal preference, you don't have to run it, but it's essentially really easier now with Artist Synchron. This card is essentially a really good scale 8 if it gets destroyed. Its monster effect is like it needs one tuner and one synchro monster, one or more synchro monsters, so it's essentially a little bit hard to summon, but you can use a Pendulum monster as a tuner, any Pendulum monster, so that's pretty awesome. His monster effect, when you do that, you can add as one card from your graveyard to your hand, and you can, when you destroy a monster by battle, he essentially doing to your opponent like he cutting their life point in half, and the scale is just protecting your Pendulum monster from getting destroyed. And it's also just like if a Pendulum monster attacks, and also you don't take damage from battles, and if it's attack and the attack went successful and one is destroyed or just whatever, your opponent monsters lose the attack of that monster, all of them, until the end of the turn, I believe, or I'm not sure if the end of the turn are permanent, but regardless, this is just an awesome effect. For level 8s, one Ignister, because Ignister, really cool, and you can also special summon your Luster Pendulum if you don't open up with it. One Enlightenment Paladin, sorry. This card is pretty good because the Dark Spellcaster, so you can special summon it from the graveyard with Black Fang, and it's also recycle a spell, and it's also if you destroy a monster by battle, you deal to your opponent the damage of the attacking of the monster. Then one Supreme King Clearwing, because it's better than the other one. It's pretty generic for this deck, not generic, but pretty easy to this deck because it's a level 8. Its other effect is basically when it's the summon is a Lightning Vortex. If it attacks, it can basically once per turn to essentially what it called destroy the monster even before the battle, before the damage calculation, and just dealing to your opponent damage equal to that monster attack. So that's actually pretty awesome. And then we also run for Synchros level 7 Artist Meteor Burst, because it is a target for Artist Fusion essentially, and also useful with Noble Dragon Magician. So that's actually pretty much it for the Synchros, and that is my favorite mechanic, so that's why we also run 5 of these. Next up, for your Xyz, you want to run one copy of Artist Absolute, because it's essentially a Utopia, and you can special summon cards for Artist monster from your hand or graveyard when you use that effect. And when it's getting sent to the graveyard after it was Xyz summoned, you can special summon any Artist monster from your extra deck, so you can even special summon Venom, which is awesome. Next up is Red Eyes Flare Mill, because Flare Mill is essentially your, what I call it, is essentially a really good card to sit on after you just smash your opponent's face, because you're just leaving them with 1,000 or 1,500 life points, and let's see them come back from that. That's really pretty awesome. Then the Supreme King version of Dark Rebellion, just to go with the theme, and just because it's better, because during the damage step you can detach one Xyz material, not 2. This card gaining the attack of a monster you're targeting, or just attacking this card until the end of the turn, and it's making that attack making the attack of a monster 0, and he's gaining that attack. So that's pretty stupid, because he can become like attacking a blue eyes becoming 5500, your opponent blue eyes become 0, and you're attacking your opponent for really huge chunks of damage. So that's one of my favorite X's to go to. And then lastly, for X's, it wouldn't be a magician deck without one time star. I run one time star for the sole purpose reason I don't need more than one. I might actually consider bumping up to 2 if I'll see you to it. If you want to, you can take one of the fusion or synchros, but I just need just the one, because his search ability, I need it one or twice. His other effect, that the one that matters, and most of the time I can just revive it with Black Fang, so just need the one in my opinion. And then lastly, one Decode Talker, because Decode Talker is the link monsters that we need. And that pretty much does it for the deck. Sorry for taking 20 minutes of your time, but that does it to my Odd Eyes Magician and Performable deck profile. Hope you guys enjoy. Don't forget like, subscribe. It's really helped my channel. It's actually really helped me evolve, and I'm actually really happy we're at like 51 subscribers right now. So hope you guys enjoy. Don't forget to like, subscribe again. Don't forget to, if you want to essentially be like my Facebook page, to follow my Twitter page. If you will have enough followers and likes, I will start like posting things daily or weekly or whatever. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, have a good day, and remember, this game, the key is creativity.